Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I think a lot of us would agree that we are living in an amazing time where things are changing all the time. But you know, if you went back in time, there's probably been that same sentiment throughout history. I think people have always felt like they were living in a time when major changes were happening. Our next guest has written a book that takes place in 1566, and from what I read, it seems like the world back in those days was kind of the same way. We felt like everything was coming together. We were having a grasp on how to use the technology of that day, and of course it was juxtaposed. Is that the word, Robin? Juxtaposed against the politics and the religion of that day. And guess what? We got the same circumstance today. The Reversible Mask is the name of the book. It is a wonderful book. It's written by our guest, Loretta Goldberg. It is described as an Elizabethan spy novel. So let's find out about the book. Good morning, Loretta. Thank you for waiting in. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Robin, and hello, all Ocala. I'm thrilled to be talking to you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Where are you calling from?
New York City.
You're in New York. Oh, I can hear the New York accent, Robin. You hear it?
I do. I think it's great.
I'm teasing. Are you originally from the United Kingdom?
No. Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, Australia. I'm sorry. We Americans make that mistake all the time, don't we?
You're forgiven. We're all colonial. Should I have said that?
Let's see. I probably have that in my notes. I should have read my notes. So tell me about the time era that the story takes place in. That's an important thing for us to know, isn't it?
Yes. It's an Elizabethan spy novel which puts it in the 16th century, and I recount the exploits of a dashing adventurer, courtier, and double agent, Edward Latham. Now, he can't reconcile the conflicting passions that are battling for his heart in 1566, love of country, which is now Protestant, and his Catholic conscience. Now, the contemplative life isn't for him. He throws everything up to spy for European Catholic monarchs abroad, and he goes on a lot of missions. One takes him to the bed in Brussels of the greatest woman singer of the day, an emperor's concubine. He ends up in Constantinople, where he sees the dreadful comet of 1578, and he's on the banks of the river Scheldt when the first self-detonating bomb ship blows up with devastating effect, a little bit like the atom bomb. But when Europe's religious wars threaten England, his patriotism returns. He becomes one of Elizabeth's best spies abroad. So that's really the nugget of the novel. Which has quite a span.
So this sounds like it's set against, true history. So this is, would we describe it as a historical novel?
Yes.
And was the main character based on a real person?
Very loosely. There was a man called Anthony Standen that I read about, and he was a double agent. He started off as a spy for Catholic Spain, genuinely Catholic, genuinely patriotic in the end. And he couldn't reconcile these two genuine drives in his heart. So I started to think about today, as you said, we all have like split cause to some degree. Like I go to the Gap and I buy a sweater, and at the other end of that sweater there may be a Bangladeshi girl who died in a factory fire. But I have to confess I wear the sweater. And there's a tobacco executive who sends his kids to fantastic colleges on the profits of cigarettes that everyone knows are poison.
That's right, yeah. So, oh my gosh, yes. That you're hitting on something I've thought about a lot. Yeah, we do those things, don't we?
Well, we can compartmentalize, and it's usually temporary. But Standen, he couldn't. He really believed in transubstantiation and a physical hell, yet he risked his life more than once for his heretical birth country. So I said, well, what was that like? You know, I wanted to wander in his world. Now, the man stand-in is just he's terribly ambiguous. There's no book written about him, I think, because he's so ambiguous. There's a number of articles. So I invented Edward Latham and explored his inner journey, tightly woven into the major events and the conflicts and turbulence of the day. Because, as you said right at the beginning, Larry, it was a very turbulent time.
Do you know, if we look back using technology as a starting point, if we could talk to people in the 16th century, and as an author, you sort of are communicating with the 16th century, and technology, we might have some answers for them that they wouldn't even know, and until several hundred years later. But it sounds like you're using something that is actually still with us today. So it would be hard, for example, to talk to somebody in the 16th century and convince them to, I guess, to open their eyes or open their mind to what's influencing their decisions based on religion or politics, when we do the same thing. That's, I guess, where I wanted to go with that.
Yes, because I think there are some recurring human fissures within our psyche that makes us react in ways we wouldn't expect. For instance, one of my childhood fantasies was, what would Francis Drake think of Melbourne traffic jams? Every day we got stuck up on a hill on a stick-shift car, right, which is not ideal.
Right.
And I imagined him coming back and just bursting out laughter that we could invent this thing that goes 100 miles per hour, but never thought of doing the roads that would get us where we needed to be at the time when it was most important, going to work or coming home for our favorite TV shows.
Right.
So human nature sort of repeats. What about the religious fundamentalism? There's a siren call of martyrdom today, and it was a very different one, but there was a different one then. Traditional alliances are sort of upset because of religion then, and they're sort of eddying now. So what about the printing press, which changed everything?
It did change everything, yeah.
What about our social media today? So it's those correspondences.
Oh, wow. And
I see.
And those two things, the printing press and, as you say, social media, should have enlightened us to the point where we weren't at each other's throats anymore because of religious differences or cultural differences. But that hasn't happened. We're still fighting those same wars.
Yes. And what draws me to historical novels is that we know the outcome, so that we have this frame, this very firm frame in which we can then imagine and feel.
It just seems like people are really, really in love with Queen Elizabeth I. And they just can't seem to get enough of her.
Yes.
She was like a woman before her time in the way of her attitude and caring and everything. Well,
she is a fascinating person, partly because, for like 3 or 4 reasons. I think one is her reign was long, 45 years. So there's a lot to look at. Secondly, on a very primal level, she was a vibrant, passionate person with a lot of libido who died a virgin. Now that's already dramatic. And being the daughter of a father who executed her mother and dispatched various other wives has to be dramatic. But more than that, she appointed counselors who were as strong-willed as she was, and everybody documented except for her. It was a golden age for language, which is one of the reasons I love the period. But not just for poets and playwrights like Shakespeare or John Donne, but for lawyers and clerks and diplomats and these whining, complaining civil servants of hers who, wrote pathetic letters about how they couldn't make her do
what
interesting. And then if you read the law trials, you've got these lower-class people with these inventive curses, like the pirates and the murderers and the thieves and people with dreams. Shakespeare just had to walk down the street to get his low-life scenes. The language was everywhere. So I think that's one of the reasons why the fascination goes on.
So one of the cultural differences that we hopefully I'm right about this, I could be wrong, but the attempt to have some kind of a level playing field between men and women, between the races, between everybody, that's something we're trying to hone and make better. We're trying to make that perfect. Clearly, that was not the case in the 1500s. I mean, your ladies were clearly a different class of humanity, at least in the English-speaking world, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely agree. Mm-hmm.
So did you have to account for that or work that into the story? Is that a challenge for you as an author?
No, because ladies were an inferior species into the 20th century. So I have male and female characters in the novel. I have some strong women who I totally invented in roles of subagents and Latham servants. But no, that wasn't really difficult. I just had to read about what the laws were.
How is it that was the case, but not necessarily with royalty? It seems like royalty was the exception. Mm-hmm. Right? Am I right about that?
Mostly, yes. The French are a little bit more liberal in terms of their the Salic law, the who could inherit. And yes, if somebody had the right bloodline, they could inherit. They had a hard time. Elizabeth really paid a price, I think, in keeping a distance from her various male seekers after power. So I think when monarchs married, female monarchs married, then the results weren't always very good. Mary, Queen of Scots, is an excellent example, but so was Mary Tudor, the sister of Elizabeth I, who married Philip II of Spain.
Is it a comfortable place for you to go when you're writing and your mind goes into the Elizabethan era? Is that comfortable? It seems like it would be. That's why I'm asking.
It's comfortable in one way and horrible in another. It's comfortable insofar as I do have a little background in it. My first degree was in English literature and history, so I have that cultural education. But it's uncomfortable because I know all about the medicine and the childbirth and the smells and the cruelty, particularly to animals. So it's uncomfortable from that standpoint.
Music plays a very important role in your life right now, and music played a role back then. What drew you to that?
Well, I would say that music affected my perception as I was reading about Elizabeth I. She was a good musician. And I began to think, as I was reading about some of her political manipulations, that this woman thinks in multiple tracks. She's a polyphonic politician. She's not a monodic. Mm-hmm. She's not linear. She doesn't think X plus Y. She thinks, let's set up, A, B, and Q, and manage all of the different lines as they go along. So I hadn't really read that analysis of how she operated. So that was really one of the things that really prompted me to do it. Now, she saved polyphonic music in England. In 1559, she put a clause into the religious settlement that turned English Protestant and formed what is the Anglican Church today, saying that it was illegal to do anything to harm the endowed polyphonic choirs. Now, her Protestant ministers hated her for it, but they couldn't do anything about it. And a lot of great music has been written because of that. We wouldn't have it if it hadn't have been for that clause. And now Latham, who was a good lute player, every decision he makes, he turns to music first to try and find his emotional he's a spy. So he's torn in many different directions, and with a spy, betrayal is built in, but the question is, what won't he do? So every time he's trying to find his direction, he turns to music to intuitively get there. So there are a lot of music scenes in it. And then the other one other thing I would say is that I was a musician at one point, and I did a lot of substitute organ playing. So I was off at this church, this denomination, the Reform Jewish. I never knew where I would be playing services. Wow. I had a lot of experience, let's say, listening to sermons.
And it seemed like you were drawn to Liszt.
Franz Liszt, yes. Mm-hmm. That was my first recording, and I was lucky enough to find a major work that hadn't been, for piano, that hadn't been recorded or published. So, yes, that did.
The book is called The Reversible Mask. It's written by our guest, Loretta Goldberg, and I found it on Amazon, and it looks like this is the beginning of a series. Am I right about that?
Yes, it could be. It's a standalone book, but there is definitely sequel material, which would be, I think, rather short and compact, around a very dramatic event that occurred the year after the Armada, where there are some more sort of upending alliances that were shifted, and then a longer third part in which the main character, Latham, who's based on Standen, still can't reconcile the tensions between him when he outlives Elizabeth. So, yeah, there is definitely the material
I think,
for it to be extended.
And it sounds like with how you developed Edward Latham is bringing somebody to life, although of a different name, that I guess puts some color into an era that seems black and white, looking back at it from our perspective.
Oh, I hope so. I hope people can identify with lots of aspects of him. I tried. He himself doesn't have a long-standing romance because he's too nomadic. I was interested in exploring political marriages, political affairs, affairs that have love, lust, and an agenda put together. But there is a love story between his servants. So there is a genuine romance in the novel.
Well, you brought up Mary Queen of Scots earlier, and they just released a movie about her. Did you see the movie?
Yes, I did.
And what did you think of it?
Have you seen it?
No, I had not yet, but that's one on my list to go see.
Yes. Well, I thought two things. I actually thought the first half of the movie that was concerned with Mary Queen of Scots was rather good, and it was brave enough to go into some of the complicated bisexuality that was going on, and some of the plots that were going on in Mary's brief tenure in Scotland of about 6 years. The peeve I have about it is the portrayal of Elizabeth, where they had her getting marked on the face from smallpox, when in fact she had smallpox but didn't have a single mask. And they're making that the origin of the white paint that covers her face. And my pet peeve with that is that Elizabeth was an attractive, supple woman into her 60s. And everybody else in the court also wore white lead paint on their face, all the women.
Oh.
And she's always portrayed in movies as the only one. Here is this, kabuki type of white-faced creature whose humanity has been stripped out, surrounded by lusty ladies without any makeup, or at least the makeup that makes you look like you're dealing with the Hunger Games or something like that. That's all wrong. And I will be blogging about that, in a few weeks.
Yeah, because Betty Davis played her in one of the movies, and that's the way they made her face up to look. And I thought, wow, that's a real disservice.
Well, it's not a disservice if everybody else is made up to look like it. So that's all my pet peeve is. There have been marvelous actresses who've played Elizabeth, totally equal to it, like Cate Blanchett, Glenda Jackson, Helen Mirren. I've seen them all, but I've never seen a script that I really love.
Is this book likely going to lead to a script? I mean, will this be, or have you had Hollywood knocking on your door?
No, but that's because they haven't listened to you. There is a chapter in the book where I go right into Elizabeth's point of view at the point of the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. It's one of the later chapters, chapter 27, I think, something like that. People like different aspects of Elizabeth. Some people are very drawn to how much heavy petting she got into with this man or that man. I'm really interested in the political, the finesse, political Elizabeth. That's the one that interests me the most. So I haven't seen that enough in movies.
Queen Elizabeth in England right now, do you think her mother was named after Elizabeth, or do you think she took on that name?
Oh, this current Elizabeth
Yes.
II was named after her own mother.
Right.
That line, I think, does descend from Mary, Queen of Scots. I do think that whole Windsor line, because James I, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots and Darnley, and I have a lot about Darnley and Mary, Queen of Scots in the second chapter. The daughter of James I and 6th of Scotland, 1st of England, Sophia, I think, went to married a German count, and it was from that line that this line descends. So Mary Stuart won after all.
Oh, I see.
but Elizabeth has the legend. I mean, she put in some reforms early in her reign, the first 3 years, that were still being celebrated on her accession day in the late 19th century. The Exchequer celebrated her currency reform, and the Department of Education celebrated her contributions to elementary education.
Oh, my.
I wonder how she would have felt
that's
about...
the legacy.
I wonder how she would have felt about Brexit.
Oh, she wouldn't have gotten in there in the first place.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But that's not to say that she would have been wrong. She would have been wrong about that.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and I think a lot of people who live there right now agree with what you just said. Yeah, as an American, I'm kind of ignorant about that. I've spoken to enough people from England to know that it's a very passionate thing for them. So, and it sounds like they want to stay in the Union. I don't know. The Reversible Mask. Oh my gosh, you have written a classic, and we're privileged to be able to be among the first to see it. I have a copy of the book, and it's really a beautiful book. It's a long book. It's 517 or 18 pages. I'm looking at it right now. Call me if you want the copy that was sent to us. I'll be glad to set it aside for you. The number is 622-9622. The rest of us have to go buy it. I did find it on Amazon. Is your website your name?
My website is lorettagoldberg.com. There's a lot of blog and slideshow and all sorts of things on the blog. And it's available at Amazon in Kindle, and it doesn't cost anything if you're on the monthly Kindle thing. Otherwise, it's like $4.99 and then the paperback. But any good bookstore would get it. So if you want to patronize your local bookstore, you just have to give them the title and the ISBN number. They'll get it for you.
I do believe we saw it at our local Barnes & Noble. I was looking at the cover thinking to myself, wait a minute, I think I've seen this in the store.
Barnes & Noble has it.
It's a wonderful book, too. I really enjoy it.
So if you don't want to wait for the mail, you can drive down there right now and go get it. I love our local...
Well, and by the way, anybody who reads it, I would love to hear your thoughts and put up a review. And if you have any questions, get to me through the website. I love to answer questions.
And speaking of reviews, if I could just read the first line of one of them. This is from one of your reviewers named Karen. She writes, I read a lot of historical novels, and this book is one of the best I've read regarding the turbulent times after the death of Henry VIII. Wow. You're hitting it out of the park, it sounds like. Thank you so much for being on the air with us, Loretta.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Robin. Have a wonderful day.
You too. We'll be right back.
Thanks.